Hey everybody, it's Paul Harris with Blackhawk Recruiters here in sunny California. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. As you may know, I run an executive search firm that specializes in the telecom infrastructure space, so wireless, wireline, and kind of all the stuff that spins in that orbit. And last week there was a great trade show in Orlando, Florida called CCA. So in case you were not able to make it, I'm going to do my best in the very next few minutes to kind of give you the highlights of what happened, talk about some of the keynote speeches, and just kind of do my best to make sure you felt like you were there, okay? So CCA Competitive Carriers Association. So basically, this is an advocacy group that, you know, for the smaller, more rural, regional carriers. They've got about 100 members, mostly Tier 2 and Tier 3 wireless carriers. So why do they call themselves the Competitive Carriers Association? Basically, it's a group that is formed to help figure out how they can compete against the big four wireless carriers, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint. So Steve Barry, who's the president and CEO of CCA, he led the charge as always. He always does a great job during these shows. And normally, you know, when you go to these shows, they have a golf tournament, you know, standard fare. Well, Steve's a bit of an overachiever because they did a golf tournament, they did a bass fishing tournament, they did a laser skeet shooting tournament. So it was a lot of fun and a lot of great learning. So let's talk about the learning. There was a lot of talk about 5G, and obviously, as you know, upgrading from 4G to 5G is incredibly expensive. So for these Tier 2, Tier 3 wireless carriers, that are in, you know, some of them not flush with cash, right? It's a balancing act in terms of the amount of money that you invest in 5G versus the ROI you're going to get and when you're going to get it, right? Make sense? So let's talk about some of the keynotes. So Brendan Carr, who's the FCC commissioner, was there, and CCA and the FCC, Brendan, they work very closely together. And Brendan has been very helpful working with CCA in terms of legislative and regulatory reform, citing policies, NG 911, you know, telehealth services, job creation, and just as Brendan calls it, getting 5G ready. So there was a lot of talk about that. He also thanked the audience for basically doing deployments in the rural areas of America, which is not New York and, you know, LA and San Francisco and Dallas, etc. So that was a great speech. Also, David Redl from the U.S. Department of Commerce was there, and he talked a lot about, you know, kind of spectrum management, right? Freeing up spectrum, all in efforts to making sure that America is the first to 5G. He also talked about the fact that they're using data from the Competitive Carriers Association members to improve the broadband mapping technologies. And so that was that. So the next was the CEO roundtable called What's Next for the Regional and Small Cell Carriers. So this was moderated by Mike Dano, who's the editor of Fierce Wireless. And the panel members were Craig Sparks from C-Spire, Ron Smith from Bluegrass Cellular, Pat Riordon from CellCom, Michael Pryor from ATN International, basically representing CommNet Wireless. They talked about, there's a lot of stuff they talked about. Kind of the sticking points for me were, you know, there's 10 years left on the 4G deployments, right? So they need to make sure that they, once again, back to the balancing act, they need to make sure that they're continuing to invest in 4G while getting ready for 5G. They talked about the need for more spectrum. They talked about a concern that they always have, which is the cost of national roaming for these guys is very expensive. They talked about how to set themselves apart from the Tier 1s, right, from the big four wireless carriers. And the answers there were kind of be smaller, and since they are smaller, they can be more nimble. They are closer to the customer, both physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. In other words, they understand how those people in rural areas think and act, and where there's a, you know, if there's a break in the coverage or something like that, they know about that. And so that's a very advantage for them. There was another breakout called the Evolution and Revolution of Mobile, the new mobile era, and this is ran by Sean Kinney from RCR Wireless. You guys have probably read all the stuff that I read, and we all read about him. He did a great job. On the panel was Bill Levy from Huawei, Hans Schiet from Nokia, Jan Soderstrom from Ericsson, and John Wigginton from InterOpt Technologies. So they talked about, well, this is basically a pretty technical presentation, by the way. So a lot of talk about VoLTE, so voice over LTE. A lot of talk about IMS, so that's IP multimedia subsystems. And basically that's basically using IP for packet communications over wireless or wireline. And when I say packet communications, I mean everything from voice to fax to instant messaging to email, internet, video, conferencing, etc. So you guys, there was a lot of other stuff that happened, and I'm sure there's a lot of videos out there you can watch, but those were kind of the highlights from my perspective. In terms of trade shows that I'm going to be going to next, my brain's a little bit full at the moment, so I'm not so sure exactly where I'm going to be next time, but you can be assured that I'm going to come back and try to give you guys a real quick download. So if you weren't there, it'll make you kind of know what happened, and then also kind of, if I can, make you feel like you were actually there. So if you have any help that you need with your recruiting needs, critical and urgent needs, we're here, and you've got my contact information right here. You're welcome to reach out for a conversation anytime. Okay, you guys, that's it for me. Thanks for listening. I hope it was helpful, and have a great day. Talk to you soon.